licensing between Rare and Nintendo was always one of fascinating discussion. Because there were so many different trademarks Rare shared with Nintendo in their second-party publishing exclusive contract. Franchises like Snake Rattle and Roll, Battletoads, and RC Pro-Am never ended up as Nintendo-owned IP, as those games were made before the 1994 partnership. Nintendo purchased 25% of Rare eventually, that increased to 49% Nintendo, with the remaining 51% with the Stamper Brothers. Rare was tasked with making IP to join the Nintendo family of franchises, such as Project Dream, which became Banjo-Kazooie, along with Killer Instinct and Blast Corps, all as Nintendo property. Rare would then enter the publishing scene. And Conker's Quest was supposed to be the very first title that Rare published and developed without Nintendo. But the game would see delay with 12 Tales takeover, eventually, Bad Fur Day, many years later in 2001. So that first published title for Rare would be Pro-Am 64, which in turn, became Diddy Kong Racing. Diddy Kong Racing had a cast of characters that Rare had full ownership over, with the exception of Diddy, Crunch, and Banjo. Nintendo had the rights to the name of the game, but the game was Rare's licensed IP. The only Rare games that would be published by Rare after Diddy Kong Racing that were Conker's Pocket Tales, Jet Force Gemini, Perfect Dark, and of course, Conker's Bad Fur Day. Even though Donkey Kong 64 was published and trademarked by Nintendo, the original new characters of DK64 were under Rare's ownership. Tiny Kong, Lanky Kong, Chunky Kong, K-Lumsy, Snide, Banana Fairy, Trough and Scoff. Nintendo was not against Rare working with the Donkey Kong license, as Rare would remake the SNES original trilogy on GBA. But due to the underwhelming nature of Diddy Kong Pilot and Donkey Kong Coconut Crackers, Nintendo had no obligation to have anything to do with them after the buyout. That's why THQ will end up being the takeover, and now without DK since Nintendo was out, and rebranded to Banjo Pilot. Donkey Kong Coconut Crackers would become its Mr. Pants. Rare was no longer able to work on the home console, would cause Donkey Kong Racing to be struck down. Rare tried to salvage Donkey Kong Racing as best they could as another IP of theirs, Saberman Stampede, but by the Xbox 360, that too, was also cancelled. When Microsoft purchased Rare after Nintendo refused to acquire the studio, Microsoft had full ownership 100% of Rare. Along with all of their original created IP, DK and Star Fox were always Nintendo's, so they simply remained as such. Nintendo was able to negotiate back the DK64 cast Rare owned, and in exchange, Microsoft would get the Nintendo IP Rare made for them with Banjo-Kazooie, Killer Instinct, and Blast Corps. Nintendo still did not manage to get the Diddy Kong Racing characters, with them even losing Banjo in the process, so it remains a Nintendo game title IP now, with an entire cast of Rare, Microsoft-owned characters. There was a common misconception that Banjo and Conker were excluded from the DS remake of Diddy Kong Racing DS and replaced with Tiny and Dixie due to them being Microsoft-owned IP. This is false. Microsoft owns all of the characters minus Diddy and Crunch. Conker was excluded due to him no longer being family-friendly themed. With Bad Fur Day and the remake Live and Reloaded's juvenile makeover. And Banjo had Nuts and Bolts shipped out the next year, so Microsoft didn't necessarily want to have their marketed Xbox title have the character in a Nintendo-published game. To this day there are still many unknown legal aspects of the game even by all participating companies. It could be a reason it is not touched today for many IP licensing issues. But then there is GoldenEye 007, which is in real legal limbo. By 5 different companies. Whenever Nintendo wants the DK games that Rare created to appear on their latest console, Nintendo needs to contact them to inform them to get slightly minor bells and whistles checked off. But regardless of who owns what title, the DKU is as vast and as explorative and as wholesome as it ever will be. That's all for now, thank you for watching.